Hey viewers, my name's Cara. It is February of 2019, and there are really multiple topics that I always kind of have rolling about in my head, mulling over, deciding what to talk about when. There are many things that I could talk about at any given time. It really just comes down to whether or not I feel the inspiration or motivation to talk about that topic at any given time. So I haven't really known exactly what of a number of things that I've been thinking about for weeks would end up being the topic of the next video that I do. But this morning, while I was checking social media, scrolling through posts and things, like you do, I came across something else that I wanted to talk about in an Instagram story, which actually continues a theme of something that I did an Instagram story about last week or sometime recently. I lose track of time really easily. Time is a construct and it's not linear and all of that. So I have no idea how long it's been. Last week, I think. So I decided to do a little video talking about this topic, which has come up twice this month so far, and really comes up a lot. It just depends on when I'm seeing people talking about it. So the topic broadly is in-group prejudice and stereotyping, which, not using the technical terms from psychology, means when people within a given group or community are prejudiced or have stereotypical, usually negative associations against other people in their group, whatever the group might be. So in the case of pagans, neo-pagans, witches, practitioners of magic, this type of group of spirituality that I consider myself a part of, when it comes to that, it means like different types of pagans or different types of magic practitioners, different types of witches, essentially being mean and being negative and passing around negative stereotypes and views of other types of pagans, magic practitioners, or witches. So if you are a witch or you're interested in witchcraft, you might know that there are lots of different types of witches. There are many ways that people describe themselves. And so that would be what I mean. This would be like kitchen witches thinking that kitchen witches are the best type and they're better than green witches, or green witches think that they're better than solitary witches, or, you know, which actually that's like apples and oranges, because you can be a solitary green witch or a covened green witch, but you know what I mean? There's just all these different terms that people use, and it makes us sound divided. It makes us sound different. In terms of paganism or neo-paganism, this might be like when people really look down on Wiccans, or if people were to look down on Druids, or blended paths like Christo-pagans, or anything like that. So it would be all these different terms that are used for the different subgroups within a wider community fighting against each other. And that is different than out-group prejudice or discrimination, which is between your own group and a group that is completely separate, a group that you're not in. So that might be like pagans versus Christianity as one example that often comes up. So the way that non-pagans, and when I say that, I mean anyone who really falls into this realm of our community, recognizing that not everyone personally identifies as a pagan. That's very important here, because it applies to everything I just said. Not everyone identifies as a witch. Not everyone identifies as a practitioner of magic. Not everybody practices magic or does spells. But I consider us many of those different things and people and paths to be part of this wider community. So that would be that's what I mean, non-pagans, having negative views about pagans, or the way that pagans feel about non-pagans. That would be outgroup prejudice. The way that pagans feel about other types of pagans, or the way that witches feel about other types of witches. That's in-group prejudice, because they're part of the same group, basically, and they're just choosing to pick fights based on individual stereotyping, basically. So what has come up recently is I've seen posts from people identifying as witches, just generally. These are not people I follow. It's like stuff that I see scrolling through tags. So I don't know a lot about their personal paths or anything like that. I only know what they say in these posts that I've seen. So I've seen like people identifying as witches saying things like witches are better than fill in the blank, or witchcraft is better than fill in the blank. Things like, don't call me a blank because I'm a witch, and witches are better, and blank means this and this and this negative thing that I really don't like, and I don't identify with that at all, and I think it's stupid, and don't ever call me that because I'm not blank. I'm a witch. And the things that I've seen people saying that about, like filling in the blank, are things that I would consider different terms, certainly. They're not witch. They're different terms for different people within our wider community. So I consider this in-group prejudice, because I consider this people in our wider community, our wider demographic of people who identify with spiritualities, spiritual and religious paths within this basic realm. Other people within that community is who people are lashing out against. And so one in specific that I saw was somebody who said, don't ever call me a light worker. I'm not a light worker, I'm a witch. And their basic tone was that they believe witches are better than light workers because of what they believe light workers are, and what they believe light workers do, and what they believe light workers believe. And based on what they had to say about what they thought light workers were like and how they were so different as a witch, was not really true. It was based on stereotypes, certainly. Like, I understand where those views came from. It is stereotypical understanding of a light worker. But they were saying things that the people I know who identify as light workers would come right out and say, that's not what we believe. That's not what light working means to the people who are actually calling themselves light workers. It's what people who don't call themselves light workers think about people who call themselves light workers. So it's not true. Maybe it's true sometimes, and maybe a better example of this might be the overwhelming prejudice that there always seems to be against people who identify as Wiccans. And we know that that stereotype that Wiccans get thrust upon them tends to be because of little kernels of truth, right? That's how stereotypes usually happen, is there are little instances where that is actually the case, and then it gets blown out of proportion to where people believe that that extreme instance is true for the entire group identity. So, whereas people might think all Wiccans are young people, all Wiccans are newbies, all Wiccans are unread, uninformed, and inexperienced. And we know that comes from the fact that Wicca's name is really out there a lot. And so a lot of people who are young and inexperienced and not well read yet, and who are new to the craft, they often find resources about Wicca first. And they might start identifying as a Wiccan early, before they really learn a lot about it, a lot of people will pick up the first term that they learn about thinking, yes, this is me. Maybe it ends up being right for them, maybe it doesn't. But so we get this stereotype that that's how all Wiccans are from the fact that a lot of people in that situation do learn about Wicca first, and they might start identifying as Wiccan first. But those of you who might know traditional Wiccans or much older Wiccans, or people who have been Wiccan for 50 years, you know, since it started, basically, you know that that is not an accurate representation of what Wicca is as a whole. It's a stereotype based on some true instances. So the same thing happens with lightworking. So the stereotypes that I hear are like that lightworkers don't acknowledge the shadow, and lightworkers ignore that there are bad things that happen in the world, and that lightworkers basically wear rose-tinted glasses and just act like everything is sunshine and rainbows all the time, and they will not acknowledge anything bad. That's the stereotype. And I believe that's mostly based on the name, light worker, and also the greeting or the salutation or the blessing that a lot of people, not just people who identify as a light worker, but that a lot of people will say, which is love and light. And love and light bullshit is something that I mentioned in my shit people say to pagans, Wiccans, witches, etc. video. Because a lot of people say it. It's not just light workers, but I think that's where the stereotypes come from. And the people who I have known throughout my entire path and practice over a decade now, older people, younger people, people in my town, people I've met on the internet, people all over the world in different groups that I'm in who identify as lightworkers would look at that stereotype and just laugh, because that's not true. That's not what they do. That's not what they believe. It's a stereotype based on the name and based on other people's interpretation of who they are. But there's a lot of people I know who identify as light workers who actually are some of the most involved in shadow work. And so some of them also identify as witches. Some of them don't. They might identify as energy workers and light workers, or healers and light workers, witches and light workers, you know, whatever. The way that people identify is personal to them. And so I do want to note in this video, it's unscripted, so I'm kind of going all over and just giving you thoughts, but I do want to note in this video that the way that people identify is important. The terms that we decide to use are important. They are meaningful to us as individuals. Not only can they help other people start to understand where we're coming from when they are used in a proper and positive way, but they can really be meaningful to a person as identifying with a group. You know, they're not just saying this is who I am and this is what I believe, but these are the other people with whom I identify because I use the same term that they do. And so the way that we each choose to identify means a lot about us and says a lot about us as a person. So I never want to say, and if anything I'm saying sounds like this, I apologize. I never want to say that, oh, these terms don't matter. They matter. The way that we choose to identify matters. That said, it appears that a lot of people forget to ask people who actually identify as the term what it means to them, and like find out what it actually means from inside the group. And instead, we just go with negative stereotypes that other people who don't like the group tell us about the group. So, for example, I, and a lot of you, identify as a witch. I see that as a wonderful positive thing, and a lot of us who identify as witches might feel somewhat of a kinship when we meet someone else online who also identifies as a witch. You know, that tells us we have something in common. We are part of a group together. And so not only does it say something about who I believe I am as a person and what I do personally, but it attaches me to a larger group and a larger community, and a web, if you will, of identification. On the other hand, someone else who has a very negative association with the word witch might meet me and find out what I believe and everything like that. And then when I say I'm a witch, they might say, well, no, you're not. Witches are not like you. Witches are evil and mean and ugly, you know, whatever the negative stereotypes are. People have stereotypes about all types of terms. I identify as a witch, and it's positive to me. But I am aware at the same time that there are plenty of people on this planet to whom witchcraft means an evil, nasty thing. And they have their own negative stereotypes about witches that I look at and I laugh, because I realize that's not true. That's not what they think we do, is not what we do. And so that's how my lightworker friends would feel looking at these stereotypes that other witches apparently have of lightworkers and say, they think we ignore the shadow. That's so funny. We don't do that. The reason that they choose to identify as lightworker is personal to them. You'd have to ask them why they like that term instead of, for example, shadow worker. One thing that I know might be the case, that is the case for some of the people that I know, probably not all the people, is that the same basic reason why we all say we focus on positive magic, because there's already so much negativity in the world that just happens as a result of everything, that those of us actively trying to counteract that and bring it to a balance. If there's already a lot of negativity in the world, doing more negative things, I guess I should do it this way. If there's negativity in the world and you're doing more negative things, we're just bringing it down. It's all just down. Similarly, if everything's happy and wonderful and we just do more happy and wonderful, then it's all still up here, right? And that might seem cool, but if you're looking for balance, for example, and everything is already really negative and horrible things are happening and more bad energy is coming into the world constantly, then in order to balance that, you need to bring it up. You need to lift it to get a balance. So the more negative, the more positive we need to balance it out. So it's like this, right? It's never truly static. But also so that it's not just boom down here. Like if both sides of your seesaw are on the ground, your seesaw is broken. Like that's not how it's supposed to work. Similarly, it's not supposed to be up here either. They're not supposed to both be up. It balances. Wow, guys, I'm a teacher. Look at that. You can use that if you want. Anyway, you get the idea. So one of the reasons that people might identify as a light worker is because they recognize that there's already a lot of darkness. There's already a lot of negativity. There's already a lot of bad stuff. There's already a lot of illness, unacceptance, you know, just horrible situations. And so to bring a balance into the world, we have to bring more light to it. So that's one theory. You'd really have to ask a light worker. Ask a number of light workers, because they'll probably all have a different answer as to why they personally use the term. But when I saw like this one person, it was actually a meme. It was a meme that someone else had created about like light workers versus witches. And it was this weird like making fun of light workers and basically saying like witches are so much cooler and better. And I'm sorry, but whenever I see that shit, I just think, stop it. Stop. What are you doing? Look at your life, look at your choices. What are you doing? Why are we doing that? Stop this divisive, comparative bullshit. It's not even true. Like, you're using negative stereotypes about basically a subgroup within our own community, trying to make yourself look cooler at the expense of someone else. Like, witches are so much cooler and better. Listen, I'm a witch right now, and I'm telling you this. That's not true. That's not okay for us to say. And the other thing that I saw recently, the one that I saw today, which is why I thought maybe I should do a little video about this, is someone was posting about how witchcraft is better than New Age stuff. And New Age is another term that has a lot of stereotypes about it. And this was just, it was like, I don't know. It was crazy to me because New Age means a certain thing. So in my Instagram story, I said, go look up the astrological ages and learn about what the ages are and read up on the new age that is referred to by that term. It refers to the fact that the world moves through what they call astrological ages, periods of about, between 2000 and like 2,200 years, periods of time, so a little over 2,000 years at a time, ages characterized by the different zodiac signs in astrology. And we are moving from the age of Pisces, the symbol of which is the fish, into the age of Aquarius. You might have heard this in a song from the famous musical Hair. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Some people believe that we are already in that age. Some people believe that we are still transitioning into the age. Either way, look up the astrological ages. Learn about what that new age, the age of Aquarius, that humanity and the planet is moving into. Learn what that means. Because yes, there are people all over this planet, again, who would look at the things that are the characteristics of the age of Aquarius and they would think of them as negative, horrible things. They're essentially like, the stereotype is that new age means hippy-dippy bullshit. And that's because the hippie movement, when it began decades ago, was characterized by a lot of these things that the age of Aquarius is about. Moving into a new way of thinking and a new way of being, expanding our consciousness, freedom, non-conformity, humanitarianism, all sorts of things. And so, yeah, there are people in this world who think that the mindset that we have, if you are a nature-based practitioner like me, people think of me as a hippie, and people think of that in a negative way. There are people in this world who look at that and think, oh, you love the earth, and you follow the cycles of the sun and the moon, that's a bunch of hippy-dippy bullshit. Whether or not I identify as New Age, there are reasons why that term fits me, because the things that I do, the things that I believe, are part of what characterizes this idea of the New Age. Caring about nature, caring about human rights, LGBTQ plus rights, raising up Indigenous people and people of color, trying to repair damages that have been done to them by systems of oppression historically. All of these types of new ways of thinking and being, going against the previous systems that were in place, having new ways of spirituality, other than just the big three that we think of, the Abrahamic ones, which are one of the main characterizations that people consider of the age of Pisces, the symbol being the fish. Fish also being a big symbol of Jesus Christ and Christianity. So people think of us moving out of that mindset, transitioning into the age of Aquarius mindset. Now, you might think that those things are negative, and that's fine. Like I said, there are people all over the world who think these things are negative and would look at me and say, that's a bunch of New Age, hippy-dippy bullshit. I don't care because that's who I am, and I may or may not identify as New Age. I may or may not identify as a light worker, but I do work with light and I do work with shadow. And so instead of identifying as a light worker and a shadow worker, I identify as a witch. But to me, light working is part of my path. And I recognize that a lot of the shit that I do can be called New Age. And instead of seeing those things as negative and something that I don't want to identify with, like, I don't go around telling people, ugh, don't call me New Age because New Agers are so stupid and they're nothing like me and I hate them. I recognize that, no, they are like me. They just mostly, not even they, because they are part of me. We identify as different terms. Because I get it. Not everyone identifies with the word pagan or neo-pagan for whatever reason. Not everyone identifies as a witch for their own reasons. So you might identify as New Age or a hippie or a light worker or whatever, but a lot of us are doing the same shit. So for example, in the story that I posted today, some things that other people would consider characteristic of the New Age movement are things like crystals, crystal healing, tarot, astrology, other forms of divination probably, energy work, energy healing, working with the chakras and other spiritual systems from the East, yoga, meditation, considering yourself spiritual but not religious, considering sexuality sacred, and identifying with or accepting expanded expressions of sexuality and gender expression and identity, all these things. Anything that is basically not conforming to what we previously thought of as rigid, traditional ideals and views of those types of things, expanding what those things mean is a characteristic of the Age of Aquarius and that new way of thinking and a new way of being. A lot of witches that I know who identify as witches do, herbal healing, herbal magic, working with plants, working with nature, anything, tree huggers, anything somebody would call you a fucking tree hugger for, and they would mean it in a bad way, but we would be like, hell yeah, I hug trees, because we believe in the spirits and the energy and the life within them and whatever. Any of these things, it's important to remember, any of these terms that we choose to identify with are still thought of as negative things by other people. The way that a term gets used, and terms, remember, are just created by people. The way that a term is used highly depends on who is using it and whether or not they like you. Let that sink in for a second. The way that a term is used depends on who is using it and whether or not they like you. I identify as a witch. I think witches are badass. So, if I call someone else a witch, I mean it in a positive way. Or if another witch calls me a witch, we know we mean it in a positive way. Someone else might look at me and call me a witch, and they might mean it as an insult, because to them, a witch is an evil, nasty thing, and it's not something you would want to be. And so they would be like, she's a witch, and she's horrible, and don't like her, witch. And I'd be like, yeah, thanks, because I see that as a positive thing. So I work with crystals, I meditate, I work with chakras, I do yoga, and trying to, keep to as much as possible the original significance of those things in Eastern philosophy and learn about what they really meant, not this Western stuff. I do energy work, energy healing, all these things. So I recognize that all of these things, right, we might think of them as witchcraft, yeah? And someone else might look at us, if I walk into a room wearing a bunch of crystals and moons and stars and carrying a deck of tarot cards, and I sit down and do a meditation for the new moon in Leo, or whatever the fuck it is, you know, I'm trying to bring in the astrology aspect there, someone else might look at me and say, that's New Age. That's a bunch of New Age. They might say bullshit if that's how they feel about it. That's a value judgment. Someone else who's really into the New Age movement might walk in and see me covered with crystals and meditating with tarot cards and whatever, and they'd be like, oh, another New Age person, cool. A witch might walk in there and go, that's a witch, fuck yeah, right? So it depends on how you personally feel about these terms. And I do not think it makes any sense whatsoever for us to sit here and say things like, oh, I'm a witch, but don't dare call me a light worker. I'm a witch, but don't dare call me New Age. When in fact, we are doing a lot of the same things. And our views and beliefs may very well be things that are characteristic of that New Age, the Age of Aquarius. We did videos on PaganPerspective years ago about the Age of Aquarius and the fifth sun. Sun, S-U-N, like the star. Suns being part of the Mayan calendar. Basically, it's a similar concept to the astrological ages, transitioning from one period of humanity to another throughout time. Only the Mayans called them suns, and we are in the fifth sun, or we are moving into the fifth sun. We're currently in the fourth. I forget, because it was a long time ago that I did the video. I might have totally different views on it by now. It was years ago that we did that video, but I remember doing it. And so they believed that, you know, during the first sun of humanity, or of the planet, I forget the details, something happened. In the second sun, something else happened, and basically it was like the world was being reborn anew, and humanity was changing, and things were changing. I don't think it was all during the timeline when humanity as human beings existed. That's why I keep second-guessing myself. It's not quite the same as the astrological ages, but it's a similar concept. So you might want to research, just Google astrological ages or the Age of Aquarius, astrology, timeline, something like that, because you don't just want to look up Aquarius, you want to look up the ages and what that means. And then you might want to look up the Mayan calendar and the fifth sun, because that's a similar concept that we talked about. But yeah, I think it's important to know where these terms come from, like New Age, because yeah, you might not identify as New Age, but when you realize where the term comes from and what that age characterizes, you might find that if you're anything like me and a lot of other modern witches, a lot of the things that you might be looking to do in the world might be things that actually are characteristic of that New Age. And so you don't have to identify as New Age, but if someone else starts talking about that New Age bullshit, instead of being offended by it, you can just recognize that that is part of you. If it is, it may not be. Because again, I know there are people out there who do not value all of the same things that I value with my witchcraft, and some of them identify as witches as well. And so we identify with the same term, but we do not have the same values throughout our entire worldview. And that's why simply looking at terms is not enough to tell us who is really like us and who's not. Someone might call themselves a witch, another person might call themselves a light worker, and another person might call themselves part of the New Age movement. And these three hypothetical people might actually do all of the same kinds of work and the same types of practice. They might all use crystals. They might all meditate. They might all work with light and shadow. They just choose to use different names for their own personal reasons. And because different names are used, we fool ourselves into thinking that we are different. we fool ourselves into thinking that witches are one thing and New Age is a different thing and lightworkers are a different thing, when in fact they blend together. They are not distinct groups. There is overlapping. There might be people who identify as a lightworker who do ignore the darkness and want to go through the world with the rose-colored glasses. Fine. There might be people in the New Age movement who are really just rather stereotypically involved in the aesthetics of it and don't really do that much else deeply with it. Fine. Frankly, the same thing these days can be said for some people who identify as witches. Fine. I think we just need to step back and realize that the terms that we use mean something to us, and we might not have the exact right idea about what someone else's term means to them. So we might be going off of a negative stereotype that means absolutely nothing to the people who are actually using the term. And in believing it and thinking, oh, witches are so much different than and so much better than lightworkers, and witchcraft is so much cooler than and so much more real than New Age, in thinking that, we are fooling ourselves. And also, on the same, similar token, as I said, there might be other people who identify as witches like I do, who really, when it comes down to their core beliefs and what they want for the world and what they believe they can accomplish with their magic, their worldview, they might be totally different than me. We might not get along at all. And so we fool ourselves into thinking that we are the same and that we have the same ideals, and we really don't. And that's how sometimes you'll get people making fun of other ways of thinking and other ways of doing things that are done by people in their same group. And that's not so cool either. So that's one of the reasons that I think Pagan Perspective is so cool, because we're all people who in some way identify as pagans, but we do things very differently. And so when you have people thinking all witches do things this same way, or all pagans do things this same way, that's not necessarily true. Just because we're all identifying as witches, or just because we're all identifying as pagans, that does not mean that we are one unified single path. So there's different things to remember on both sides of this, but we can hold that truth that we are none of us doing the exact same things at every point in our practice and in our lives. We can hold that truth that we are still individuals, while holding the wider truth that we are all part of the same community. Even though we do things differently, even though we may call ourselves by different names, there are still a lot of things that we have in common. And it might be the way that we identify, or it might be the things that we do, the things in which we believe, the direction in which we would like to see the world going. Any number of these things, right? And simply the fact that I am saying this, the fact that I am saying these people are all considered part of my spiritual community to me, and just because we use different names doesn't mean that we're actually different from each other. This is not out-group prejudice. This is not one group of people having negative ideas about a totally different group of people. This is in-group prejudice. Me saying, this is us attacking ourselves, friends and fam. This is us. The mere fact of me saying that in this video, to some people, would look like New Age, hippy-dippy, love and light bullshit. And I honor that. Some people think it's bullshit. Some people don't want to accept everybody. Some people don't want to admit that we are more similar than we are different. Some people want to keep dividing us and keeping us separate and weakening our power by making us all do things differently and separately, away from each other. When in reality, no, we are not all exactly the same, but we're a lot more similar than we are willing to give credit for a lot of the time. Call me a hippie, call me a new age, fucking somebody called me a space cadet once. Cool, I don't care. But stop needlessly dividing each other. Before you buy into these generalized negative stereotypes, try to figure out what these terms mean to the people who are actually using them. Do some research, learn about the ages, learn about what New Age means. Read some articles from people who identify as light workers, find out what they're doing, because again, the people that I know who identify as light worker, some of them also identify as witches, but even when they don't, a lot of them are doing some extensive, deep shadow work to heal their darkest, most nightmarish patterns within their energy throughout lifetimes. They're doing some serious fucking shit. And I'm proud to know them and work with them. And yet, here are other people on the internet going, those light workers, they're so superficial and they ignore the darkness and I'm a witch and I'm cool and I do better than... Stop. Just stop it. We're not cooler than anybody. We're not better than anybody just because of how we decide to identify. The way you identify is important to you, and that the way that I identify is important to me, and I wouldn't want anyone spitting on that either, so I'm not spitting on that. Just saying, it doesn't give us the right to be mean and post divisive memes based on stereotypes that aren't even true. So stop. Okay, with that, love and light to all of you. Seriously though, love you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'll see you around. Don't forget to be awesome. Being mean to people based on how they identify in any category is not awesome. Don't forget to be awesome. Blessed be, and goodbye.